Yeah, Research for the Global Common Good is the title, and probably the title is a little bit too big for really answering it fully. I would rather say, actually, probably it's a search process that we are also going through at IDOS. What exactly is not just research, but maybe science in the wider sense of doing research, contributing to training and early career research or development, as well as to policy advisory activities, and how that can be, how that field of research for the global common good or science for the global common good can be deciphered. I think it is a search process, but I hope that I can contribute to an interesting discussion here within the Interfaces project. And I would like to start with sensitizing all of us for the empirical variety of knowledge. There are so many different types of knowledge. I just put a few here as sort of examples, but of course there are many, many more. Maybe some of you, I'm not sure how interactive this virtual format is planned to be, but some of you might be able to think of other types of knowledge. And all of these knowledges contribute and constitute reality. They are all part of constituting social reality. And what we from research often try to do, or from development research often try to do, is on the one side, try to get as close as possible, empirically speaking, to that reality in order to capture it, but also then to analyze it and potentially even contribute to it, potentially even contribute to social change processes. So there's sort of this whole bandwidth of doing the empirical research that helps us understand what might be called reality, to then even shaping that, or co-shaping it. And in many ways, I would argue that Interfaces has that ambition to study, but then also to co-shape. And what I would like to today look at is basically two aspects. One, I would like to briefly look at the global science system for some time to reflect on what can this science system, I mean, is there even one science system? And I would actually argue, no, there isn't. There are many different ones. And they're also shaped by substantial asymmetries between them and within them. And then take sort of the next step and try to think about, well, how can a project such as Interfaces contribute to not fully, well, hopefully dissolving to some degree the asymmetries within the science systems and between them, in order to deal with some of the negative consequences of these asymmetries. So that's not two parts basically to the talk today. First, the global look at the science system, and then the look into what we are doing within Interfaces, but also in many other projects. And if we start with the science systems globally, of course, it's in many ways very simplified to look at the funding structure only. But nevertheless, I think it's important to do that and use the look at the funding structure globally to remind us of the fact that we have science systems that have developed since a long period of time, are funded at different rates. So the historical sort of depth of these different science systems varies, the funding varies. Their take on the disciplinary mixes, the answers given there vary quite a bit, or also on the mix of how applied research should be, how basic research, what type of basic research is endeavored. We have, if we just stick with science funding globally, we have a big variety ranging from science systems that are quite well financed, one could maybe say, such as, for instance, the German science system that is financed with around 3% of the German GDP. But we also have science systems from from large economies such as Indonesia that only are financed with 0.2% of the Indonesian GDP. And these are always percentages of the GDP. So it really is also a communication of how much importance is in a way connected to financing these systems. We have the European Union in general aiming for 3%. We have the African Union, for instance, aiming for 1%. And I said already, I mean, the funding is only one aspect, but of course with funding also the development of organizations and the ability to put emphasis on applied as well as basic research, put emphasis on many different disciplines, or rather narrow it down to certain disciplines, etc., has of course a lot to do with financing. Thus, if we look at the funding situation and remind ourselves also of the different ages of science systems, if we understand these systems as they were originally sort of emerged out of the Enlightenment period of Europe roughly 200 years ago, then we must argue there is not one global science system, but actually many different ones, and there's a lot of diversity, something very important and positive. But we also must realize that most science systems are actually nationally organized. The large bulk in terms of funding, science funding, is actually nationally channeled, collected, and then nationally administered funds. Now, that does not necessarily mean that the national interests of nation states determine fully the agenda, but it is important to keep that in mind. There's only actually only the European Union is one regional science space that, out of a science studies perspective, really is quite an exception to build a regional sciencescape. If you compare it with other regional bodies, they generally spend a lot less on building a joint sciencescape than the European Union. So even ASEAN does not do so. So that means that we have largely actually nationally organized and financed science systems. And of course, the standards set are then nationally set, of course, in dialogue with international standards, but nevertheless, you have quite significant differences between, for instance, the German science system and the French science system. And that has not only to do with the language, but how these systems are organized. And we know that the agendas are set within well-financed science systems, a lot based on basically internal discussions amongst the scientific community on what has to be researched, also based on discussions with national policymakers, and in many ways based on the perspectives within that given science system onto the world. In less well-financed science systems, we can empirically speaking actually see a lot of collaborations taking place, or substantially more collaborations with international partners determining agenda setting process as well. So we did a study, for instance, also on the Indonesian science system, where you can show that the agenda set nationally mirrors only to a very limited degree in what is actually being worked on, the thematic areas and disciplines, and is then even less traceable in the publications, because you have a very high external dependency, basically. I'll take you now to Hannah. Before mentioned, I worked on the marine space for a while. Sorry, I have to take this jacket off. It's too hot. I apologize. So Hannah mentioned I worked on the marine realm for a while and coastal areas, and I just want to share one study that we did there, where we basically did a scientometric analysis on. You see it here on the slides. We looked at 2,877 articles published in English. So that's the limitation to the study. In English on the Web of Science, or any journal that is connected to the Web of Science, on tropical marine coastlines. And basically always looked at where does the funding come from, where are the authors located, and where are the research regions located. And then you can also look at thematic patterns, where do certain questions, where did they pop up first, in which world region, where did they then later on get worked on in other world regions, etc. But what you see very clearly is already here on this diagram, that there is that you have on the one side strong historical path dependencies. So many first author countries, basically in the Anglo-Saxon realm, would work on countries that formerly belonged to the British Empire, or also regionally based path dependencies. So many Australian and New Zealand authors working on the Pacific Island area, or also on Southeast Asia. And you see that the first author countries are often located basically in better financed research systems and science systems. Of course, I said already, there is a bias in that data set, no? Because it looks at the English-speaking publications only. Having said that, English is the main globalized language of science. And with this, it still gives us an insight, into what type of science basically then is being published and read within this English-speaking scientific environment. You can then, of course, look at how the disciplines have contributed to knowledge production over time. So the majority of single discipline articles were from natural sciences, just only around 8% were actually interdisciplinary in the sense of bringing natural and social scientists together. But also you can look at where the first and the secondary mentioned authors came from, and what kind of mix you find in the authorship position on the paper between the different nationalities. And you can see here, European, North American, and Australian first authors have the highest percentages of collaborative articles. So you see some quite not surprising pattern, but a pattern that probably all of us know already to some degree, but you see it in numbers and with regard to the knowledge production that is then captured on Web of Science with regard to tropical coastlines. So what we see here is a certain number of historical path dependencies I already talked about, but partly also you see in the marine sciences, of course, the effect of scientific infrastructure, such as laboratories, which countries have basically the resources to finance research vessels, the RVs. Research vessels are extremely expensive, and have the resources to run laboratories for the tests. So what you can see here is that over time, due to these infrastructures of knowledge production, we basically reproduce epistemic inequalities, inequalities between science systems, between nationally organized science systems, but also between disciplinary organized science systems, that also within and between nationally organized. So the disciplinary organized science systems you have the fragmentation within then the national context, but also within the international context. Now, if we just take this into a different setting, I just wanted to reflect on it a little bit more, showing these slides on publishing behavior with regard to sustainable development goals. I just show 2 slides on this because it's hardly readable, but the important part of that slide is basically the message here in the red box on top. Yeah, so these are publications produced between 2011 and 2019 on the impacts of human behavior on the health of soil, freshwater, and air pollution. The interesting part here is how you see that over these nearly 10 years, the publications in these 3 fields coming out of upper middle income economies substantially increased, while those from coming out of high income economies substantially decreased. Yeah, so you see there seems to be a shift in focus happening for some reason. High income economies in these 10 years put less emphasis on studying the effects of human behavior on the health of soil, on fresh water and air pollution. Somehow these topics were no longer as en vogue, in fashion, whatever. Now, if you look at the same on a different topic, and I chose here now the topic of new or re-emerging viruses that can infect humans, in the same period of time, you see substantial publishing happening in high-income economies. In upper middle-income economies, it also increased in importance, the topic, but in total, a lot less publishing there took place. And the same holds true for low-income economies and lower middle-income economies. Now, I'm showing this simply to basically draw a line here to the corona pandemic and bring in the discussion of how important these science systems and the asymmetries between science systems, or between nationally organized science systems and also then between regional science systems in a situation such as the corona crisis, or in any moment of dealing with ruptures and change processes. And I think we all remember what the situation during the corona crisis, where it became very clear that those regions in the world that basically had the science systems, but also the production systems to develop their own vaccine, were in the position of having access to these vaccines much, much faster than those regions that were not in the position of producing that themselves. Yeah, so I'm just trying to here underline how crucially important it is to build up science systems across the globe in all world regions. And of course, also with a substantial disciplinary spread, because one never really knows when the next moment of knowledge requirement basically comes in. Yeah? So here, these asymmetries, of course, played out substantially. And underline once more the asymmetries between knowledge systems, between science systems, and between nationally organized and between regionally organized science systems. I come to my last slide on the science system discussion. I think it's important, or it can be summarized, first of all, that there is not one global science system, and I think I'm not trying to say this in order to criticize, but I think it's important to realize that these asymmetries that exist between science systems lead to or create a basis for power imbalances and epistemic inequalities to again and again and again be be replicated. And these situations, of course, lead to, on the one side, the insufficient ability of world society to come together and develop solutions jointly. Yeah, we have substantial data biases basically in our data sets. We have data sets that lack the insights from many different parts of the world, but also not just only lack the insights from different parts of the world, but also out of different knowledge systems of the world. Yeah, the diversity of the science systems, that also is part of the element that there isn't one science system, is not actually harvested in a way. It's not brought together in a diverse or in fully developed databases that capture this diversity. We have then a situation on the global level where we again and again find ourselves in UN level negotiations, for instance, where some mobilize sort of the epistemic authority of their science systems, and others, well, basically have to decide whether they follow the insights of these science systems or not. Yeah, even within the IPCC, you have a situation where an inequality based on the expertise and the expertise available exists, but it also means that there's the communicative space, or the space where the negotiation and the contestation takes place, is not a level playing field. Yeah, if some can mobilize sort of the authority of the science systems and others cannot, or not to the same degree, and it means in many ways that yeah, we are hindered on the multilateral level in our decision making, because we again and again get into this deadlock that some countries feel, well, why are we supposed to take on the insights of science systems that are not ours? Now, maybe to make it a bit more clear what I'm trying to say, the European Union, when we want to advise Brussels, Brussels says, we will only listen to your advice if you bring authors together from at least 3 different science systems of Europe. So it's part of the funding lines of the European Union that when you publish policy briefs, etc., and want to engage in policy advisory processes with Brussels, you have to bring researchers together from basically Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, and Western Europe, the different parts of Europe, because the policymakers say, if there's a policy brief just coming out of Germany, it might be an extremely, scientifically speaking, a very useful policy brief, but for the political logic, we cannot use it. Because in the political negotiation process, we need a policy brief that is actually supported from science systems across the European space. Yeah, and if you think that logic further to the multilateral level, that's exactly what we are missing. We are missing the situation where on the UN level, it's clear, or I mean, we are trying to build it through IPCC and IPBES, but it's still insufficient. Yeah, we are still in a situation where there is this thought that the insights from sciences are neutral, politically neutral, and have to be sort of taken up by all national governments in the same manner. But of course, for the political process, it is important to be able to draw on scientific insights from a range of different countries. And the second effect, of course, is that we have again and again encounter this fact that the solutions or innovations or technologies developed by research actually don't fit the local context, because they were not developed within these local contexts. So how do we deal with it? I mean, on the one side, this I just say fast, on the one side from IDOS, we try to bring into a number of policy advisory processes on the level of the G20 and G7 again and again, the discussion of how important it is to nurture an understanding on the multilateral level that actually we need multilateral science funding bodies. Yeah, we need to strengthen Belmont Forum, we need to strengthen Future Earth, etc. But we also need to find ways that more and more countries invest into their own science systems more. But how do we do it, address it in interfaces? I can't fully say yet, but I want to draw on one example from a project that was actually implemented and located at CEF, and I was part of for many, many years. And it was a research project in the northwest of Uzbekistan. And I just put here the project objectives. Yeah, it aimed at developing concrete solutions basically for more sustainable land and water management. So very interdisciplinary, but with a clear focus to contribute to sustainability transformations in the water and land management context of Uzbekistan. And in many ways, that fits to the discussions within interdisciplinarity. Sorry, there's a phone here for me. In interdisciplinarity literature that basically say, well, if you engage into an interdisciplinary project or process, let's first think about why do we actually create an interdisciplinary team? And Barry and his colleagues, they argue, based on they looked at quite a number of interdisciplinary projects. They then argue, well, there are usually mainly three reasons, three logics for interdisciplinary setups in the projects: that they want to solve a problem, that they're problem-solving oriented, that they want to develop innovations, yeah, so basically contribute to social change processes, or third, that they want to really advance the knowledge practices and how research and knowledge production takes place between disciplines. I would argue that this Uzbek project on land and water management, it mainly applied the interdisciplinary setup for the reason of there was an aim to solve problems, yeah, to improve land and water management, and to really develop innovations. And this was the setting, so basically very rural setting in the northwest of Uzbekistan, cotton and wheat agriculture in a very state-centric system at that time, still very much shaped by basically post-Soviet institutional legacies. I won't go into much more detail, yeah, I just want to sort of touch on that example. Also here, quick insight into the team. I mean, the project ran for 10 years, so quite a lot of people actually were involved, as you can see, but also quite a few disciplines, no? So ranging from hydrology to sociology and geography, remote sensing and modeling, no? So very, very interdisciplinary setup in the research team. Now, what kind of interdisciplinarity was mainly practiced? Yeah? That's sort of what Barry and his colleagues would say. It's not just only the logics. Sorry, this is jumping. Not just the logics, so the reasons for the interdisciplinary setup, but also the question of how do you want to actually achieve it? And also there they distinguish three different modes. And they argue, well, there's the integrative synthesis-oriented interdisciplinarity. So basically the idea is that several disciplines contribute and you somehow, you start integrating the insights of the different disciplines, but basically in a by summing them up, yeah, by in a cumulative manner. Then there is the idea of a form of interdisciplinarity that they call subordination service. So basically, one discipline is the lead discipline and the others follow and just deliver data, yeah, or deliver sort of service functions to the core discipline. And then the third type of interdisciplinarity they call agonistic antagonistic, and that's where the interdisciplinary exchange actually means quite a bit of fighting, so to say. Sorry that this keeps jumping. I don't know how to turn it off. So they say agonistic, antagonistic type of interdisciplinarity is interdisciplinary research that is conceived neither as a synthesis nor in terms of a disciplinary division of labor, which you are the top two, no? But as driven by an agonistic or antagonistic relation to existing forms of disciplinary knowledge and practice. So a constant basically stretching of disciplinary boundaries and in a way shaping a new space, a new interdisciplinary field of knowledge production for then, in this case here, land and water management. Now, within the project, we did not actually go into all this interdisciplinarity literature too much, but mainly worked with this boundary crossing framework. So we basically said we bring our interdisciplinary teams together by reflecting on boundary concepts, so particular words that we all work with and that we identify and basically define together. We also have boundary objects, so joint publications and a joint database, etc., that we all contribute to, or different interdisciplinary teams contribute to, and we use this for the interdisciplinary exchange. And we consciously reflect on the boundary settings, the settings that are given by the project donor, and how we organize the project and processes in order to reflect on the interdisciplinarity. So one example for this question here was, do the social sciences have the right to decide over the project budget just as much as the natural scientists? So just as a simplified example, yeah? But these kind of discussions. And we then had, in the last 4 years of the project, we organized even a transdisciplinary process in which we aimed to develop in sort of plausible promises, what we call plausible promises, into full-fledged innovations, further together with local stakeholders. No? So here, a certain set of tree species that can reduce salt in the soil, then a certain salinity measurement tool. You see here the white on the field is not snow, but it's salt. No, a certain style of conservation agriculture for cotton or irrigated cotton agriculture, and a certain style of strengthening water user associations institutionally. And we aimed at developing these innovations further. I won't go into too much detail, but I wanted to share these thoughts on thinking through such an interdisciplinary engagement in the project, as well as such a transdisciplinary process, out of the perspective of what type of inter and transdisciplinarity were actually practiced. So here in this project, I would argue it was a form of interdisciplinarity that followed the logic of problem solving and innovation development. In order to, the aim of bringing these different disciplines together was to say, we need the different expertises in order to solve the problem of unsustainable land and water management. And concretely, we need to even bring in the practitioners and farmers and water managers to develop innovations that then fit the local context, to overcome this local fit, the lack of local fit problem that we have because of the fragmented science systems. And then in the exchange processes themselves, we worked with this boundary concepts and objects and settings, and I just put here a few examples. So even just the word of what is an innovation, to come together in an interdisciplinary team and define and say, well, we in our team understand innovation as something new that is actually working in the market, that has end users identified in a local setting, but it doesn't necessarily have to be completely new to the planet. We said new means new to the context locally. even if it might exist somewhere else, within that Uzbek context, introducing a salinity measurement tool is an innovation because it requires a lot of training. People need to take it up. It has to be embedded into the social structure, etc. So it's an innovation in itself. And the whole aspect of, is that really new to the world, does not really count. Now, we learned quite a few things from that process, I noticed that Theodore is here. We are in discussion on that process again and again to think about how we can carry these learnings also into some of the interactions and interfaces. I think the biggest learning, and just briefly, because time is running out, I realize, sorry, Hannah. The biggest learning was that the innovation packages that we worked on were far too complex. Yeah, we had to really basically take them apart again and then take out single smaller aspects of each innovation package to then develop these further with the local stakeholders, because the whole package of conservation agriculture as a total package was simply far too complex to develop further in the local and adjust it to the local setting. Now I come to my last slide. What I wanted to sort of touch on is, on the one side, reflect on how can we have to, in my view, acknowledge the fact that we, unfortunately, as a world community, work with research differently on a political level and for strategic reasons, and have a situation in which our science system again and again, because of these asymmetries between the science systems, reproduce inequalities actually. Yeah, and reproduce a situation where we as researchers run the risk to create insights or develop knowledges that don't fit the local context. Yeah, we aim to produce innovations that contribute to social change. But if we really want to do that, we need to think very carefully about how to set up processes and our teams and cooperate with partners embedded in their science systems, etc., to avoid that risk of creating insights that then again lack the local context. I try to argue that partly that has a lot to do with restructuring the global science systems themselves and assuring that national investments are being increased in many countries that we work in. But partly, of course, it's also about what we do in our project ourselves. How do we set up our processes? How do we bring the teams together? And how do we organize inter and transdisciplinarity or transformative research? That is the aim also of interfaces. And with this, I'll end, and I apologize, Hannah, that I took a tick longer.